of Paraclete Press, welcome to our virtual reading today of Or and by Jeannine Marie Pitas. My name is Rachel McKendry, and I'm the publicist here at Paraclete. Thank you so much for joining us. Our recording of today's reading will be available later on to share with anyone who couldn't join us, and we'll also let you know how to get copies of Or and all of our poetry books to add to your library. Please take a moment to find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and feel free to submit any questions you might have for Jeannine, and we'll hope to get to everyone by the end of our time together today. You can also use the chat bar if you're more comfortable with that. Just by way of introduction, Jeannine Marie Pitas is a teacher, writer, and Spanish-English literary translator from Buffalo, New York, currently residing in Pittsburgh and teaching at St. Vincent College. She is the author of one previous collection of poems, Things Seen and Unseen, and the translator or co-translator of 9 books by various Latin American poets. She is Spanish translation editor for Presence, a journal of Catholic poetry, and has contributed to work to such publications as the National Catholic Reporter, U.S. Catholic, the Christian Century, Beltway Poetry Quarterly, and the Paris Review. She has been a legal guardian to 3 young immigrants from Guatemala applying for special immigrant juvenile status in the US, and she believes firmly in the right of people to choose where they live. I'd just love to read a couple of the things that some of our other poets and friends have said about Or and Jeannine's new collection. Scott Cairns said, "In uncommonly accomplished prose and verse, and with a remarkably audible, canny, and compelling voice, these poems perform the sort of surprises that feel like long-held subconscious wisdom just now coming into our apprehension, just now when we most need such wisdom." Lovely words. And another lovely endorsement from Grace Cavalieri, who's the Maryland Poet Laureate. She says, "Every page of this book confides brilliantly through folklore, fantasy, reality, all sentiments possible in words never imagined before. Or and is a perfect title because the poems embody so many kinds of experiences, personal, social, magical, even those of crisis or and loss, all brighten the room with flair and originality. Author Pitas teaches us to be new, to be unafraid, to transcend the limits of language. I say, now this is poetry." Thank you. Fantastic words. And with that, thank you so much, Jeannine, for joining us today. It's such a treat to hear the work of the poet in the poet's own voice. So we're honored for you to be joining us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for, I'm very grateful to Paraclete for publishing this book.
It's our pleasure. I'm going to turn it right over to you, Jeannine.
Thank you. Well, again, I'm so excited to share some poems from this book, Or and. I'll just add a little bit about the book and kind of where it's coming from and the concept behind it. I'd say ultimately this is a book about choices. I wrote it in my 30s. It could be something of a proto-midlife crisis book in some ways. It's about bumping up against limits, realizing that we can't have everything in life, making choices, dealing with their consequences, and really asking the difficult question of when do we have to say or, and when can we say and? You know, when is there really a true limit that we must honor and respect, whether just imposed by another person, by reality itself, by our own limitations? And when are there times when maybe those limits are illusions and there can be a way to navigate between what seem like insurmountable obstacles and synthesize contradictions in something that actually allows an unexpected way forward through difficult circumstances. So this book is structured in 3 parts, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised that a Christian publisher chose it, because It's kind of a triptych. It's kind of, in some ways, a creation, fall, and redemption story, I would say. So I will read a few poems from each section, and then we can talk about them. If anyone has any questions, I'd love to answer. So here, this is kind of an introductory poem that I'll read from the first section. Ghost Dance Krakowiak. Ribboned braids, no fancy dance. Mazurka spun on wobbling knees. 1873. My great-great-uncle, a Polish priest, founded St. Stanislaus Church in Buffalo, New York. Born here, raised here. I used to say my ancestors were back in Poland during the crime, but Poland wasn't a country then. From colonized land to colonized land, my priest uncle landed in a genocide. They say he went to greet Polish immigrants at Buffalo's train station, brought them to the city, their new settlement. His English was good. 1890. What did he think, reading the headlines about Wounded Knee? Did he turn away? It's not my concern. Did he mutter in Polish, serves those heathens right? Did he feel any pang, any sense that his Jesus might not approve? He has made it into some history books, but this story isn't there. My babcia might have known it, but she died a century after that crime. I suspect he believed this land is my land, though he never heard the Guthrie song. My mother grew up singing it, and oh, Columbia, the gem of the ocean, while still learning her parents' native tongue. She passed that knotted language on to me, along with those slippery songs. My great uncle was of no one place. Despite what my passport says, neither am I. The beaded vest I wore as a child, the lacy apron that flew as I whirled in traditional Polish dances, Krakowiak, Kujawiak, Mazurka, Polonaise. Behind them moved another dance, one that did not belong to me. I could feel it deep in my skin, my bones, the ghost dance of those who prayed to be saved, who begged with their bodies for my people, to leave them alone at last. It haunts each dance I do, the polka and waltz of my youth, the salsa and tango and blues I learned today. Red ribbons spin like blood. Ghosts continue to dance. They twist through each step and don't go away. Here's another kind of like origin poem. This one is called Letters. My mother complains she can't read my handwriting. She says it's a scrawl like a doctor's. When I point out that I am a doctor, she rolls her eyes. Apparently, a PhD doesn't count. She was taught the right way in the 1950s by nuns. I say I can't read hers either, and it's less beautiful than she thinks. It's still better than yours, she retorts. Alas, I can't disagree. As for my father, he barely writes at all. He only lifts a pen to pay a bill, sign his name. The students I teach send text messages in class. They complain if I make them handwrite a test. They barely learned cursive in school. Sometimes I feel like one of the last monks still decorating manuscripts long after Gutenberg's disruption. I know this is an old person's sentiment. I prefer to type my prose, but I always handwrite poems. My numbers look like half-open windows, flags of countries that don't exist anymore. My letters look like hitchhikers standing at the side of the road, or old friends waving goodbye, smaller and smaller as the car pulls away. Okay. So that's the that's from the first section, Madonna of the Two Scars, and it's kind of the creation part. Now I will move on to the destruction part. Okay, This poem is maybe like a central one of the book. It's called Or, so it's sort of part of the title. Or, it's a word that reminds you you're not the world. You've never liked it. You prefer the ecstatic frenzy of and, the heaping of spaghetti and chocolate pudding and mango onto plates without any fear of stomachache. But now you're 3.5 decades into your journey and you're in a dark wood and you think it's Dante's, but fear it's Frost's, with two paths diverging. And you can't follow both and be one traveler. And you ask why you have to pick. And you'd like to split yourself in two, maybe a sober daytime Apollonian you and a drunken nighttime Dionysian one. And you try to do this, but there's a limit to how far they'll walk away from each other. You seek a middle way, even though it might send you over the rocks, straight into the brambles. You don't care how much they scrape. A therapist says you need to learn to say no, that boundaries form identity, but you rally against those who enforce political borders. In 1922, thousands of Greeks were marched into Turkey, Turks into Greece. Today in Thessaloniki, you read a message written on a wall, borders kill people. In 1947, India was partitioned. 2 million died due to lines drawn on a map. You don't want to be a country with armed guards posted. No, you can't be the world. But even at this age, you still want to be the sea, that seemingly infinite network of forkless paths, that blue container of brown and green land. And everyone knows there is only one sea. Okay. All right, I'll read another one from this section, this middle section. This one's called The Collector. I'm scared, he says, his voice muffled. 48 years old, he looks 70. His brown eyes meet mine. I remember you, but it's hard. I'm scared. I'm losing my memory. 4 strokes in 1 year. The doctors don't know why. I tell him he has to stop smoking. He nods. It's hard. It all goes, he says, and I know it. I collect guys like him. In church, I sit next to a plumber who was in a motorcycle accident and nearly died. He spends the whole service crying, calling out, disrupting the prayers. I take his hand during the Our Father, hug him for the sign of peace. You're a good woman, an usher says. I shake my head. Looks can be deceiving. I only give to make up for what I take. In truth, I adorn my home with broken brains like paintings, trinkets. I too am messed up in the head. My mind is a maze of hallways filled with statues, busts of gods no longer prayed to. Sometimes it dissolves into a network of tiny rivers that run off course, freeze unexpectedly, break dams, overflow. I can't remember why I hurt the one I most loved. How a bottle of wine on a snowy night in a yellow glowing room in a city I used to love was enough to make me deceive. Why a book of poems sent in the mail made me lie. Why a Beatles song made me hold onto the person I'd lied to long after my choices had let him go. I tried to be a do-gooder, anchor myself in those who need, but water flows wherever it wants. Stars crash into other stars, cracked and splintered. Our heads line up together in a hallway of broken gods. All right. Okay, and now for the final part, the sort of, part toward a movement towards some kind of, the hope is a movement toward growth in these poems that I'm hoping others can relate to. Okay, this one is to the polar vortex. So for some context, climate change is affecting our world so greatly. There was a hot blast of air from Morocco in 2019 that pushed Arctic air down over a lot of North America, including Dubuque, Iowa, where I was living at the time. So this poem is addressed to the polar vortex. I remember it was, I think, -40 Celsius, which is the same as -40 Fahrenheit. I didn't go out that day. And this is written after the poet Denise Levertov in January 2019. I know your coldness covers ceaseless movement. Beneath your drifts of restless snow, inside your ice globes that turn berries into belated Christmas ornaments. Ground me, please, in giving. I break off a twig of last year's mistakes and place it in my pocket. Please take me to a snow-covered wood, then teach me to glide on a frozen lake the way I never could as a kid without falling. Last year, I fell 6 times on ice and concrete, skinned my knees bright red. Please give me the wisdom those scars failed to bring. Or if that's too much, share the turquoise mittens Bee made me, crocheting for 3 full days 2 Christmases ago. I lost them on the subway. Let them be found by the one who needs them most. By your giving, may some grace return 6 months from now, pouring water on summer's dryness. Let me distribute your gifts and your stories of a cold light that can't be extinguished, of mercy that thaws and abounds in melting snow. And I'll do one more. Here's a pandemic poem because everybody has one after what we've been living through for the last 3 years now. This is called A Small Thing, and it has an epigraph from the English mystic, medieval mystic Julian of Norwich, who lived through the plague. So this is the word from the epigraph from Julian. And in this, he showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut, lying in the palm of my hand as it seemed, and it was as round as any ball. I looked upon it with the eye of my understanding and thought, what may this be? And it was answered generally thus, it is all that is made. A small thing, small as a hazelnut, small as the wild black raspberry ripening on a woodland bush, small as the hummingbird's heart beating much too fast for life. I want to go home, a voice inside cries, but no home exists. The world cracks in two. No paternal hand reaches for mine. A small thing, small as an acorn, a cottonwood seed, small as a green bloom of moss, an inchworm hanging from the sky, held in the pierced hand of a god some blame for bringing this plague, but I imagine just as confounded as we. A small thing we seek when after months without hugs, my feet reach for yours. We stop our walk to lie outstretched, our faces more than 6 feet apart, while the soles of our feet embrace and the clouds float above. 2 choices, 4 walls or 1 sky, and the human world we knew transforms faster than our feet can follow. With nowhere to run, there remains a small thing, small as a hazelnut, an apple seed, small as a child's laugh, an ant's leg, a pen's tip, a bee's wing, small as a virus, life's first built block, held in the pierced hand of God. So I think that's enough for me to read right now to give you a taste of the book. And I'd love it if anybody out there in internet land has any questions, comments, concerns.
Thank you so much, Jeannine. Another Paraclete poet has joined us, which is lovely. A couple actually. Marjorie Maddox extends her congratulations. She says, "Congratulations, Jeannine, such evocative, important poems with so many layers." And she comments, "Held in the pierced hand of God, so powerful." Thanks, Marjorie. I'd love
Yeah, thank you,
to
Marjorie.
just ask you a little bit about your process. One of the things that intrigues me about your collection is the number of different forms and styles that you write in, and how each piece is so unique. I don't know if you'd be willing to share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So one thing that I will say, just to preface this, is I have become over time a real believer in the idea that writing is a collaborative process. We're not, it's not the 19th century romantic view of some creative genius alone in their room, inspired. It's like, that's really not how it works. And I mean, even the romantic poets, like the British romantics, they had their community, they were inspired by one another. A really wonderful poetry teacher of mine, Vijay Seshadri, Pulitzer Prize winning poet, once told my class, like, any poem we write is essentially, it's as if we read a poem on a piece of paper and we're writing our own on the back. So we're always in dialogue. So I think, like, when you mention the different styles, they really come out of what I have read, and what I'm reading in any given moment. So I'm a literary translator, and that influences me in a big way. I don't think it's even conscious. I don't know how it influences me, but there's no way it couldn't at this point. So one of the poets whom I love and have translated quite a lot of work by, and I'm still translating more, is called Marosa Di Giorgio from Uruguay. And she writes in prose poetry. And so I tend to, it's actually only come about quite recently that because I've been translating her since 2006, but lately I've really been on a prose poetry kick, I guess. And it's not like I set out and thought I want to write like Marosa, because nobody can, and nobody should try. She's awesome. Check out her work, on its own. And I'd say, like, in terms of the content, I'm very, very different from her. In terms of the images, very different. But just this prose poetry thing is just something that's come to me, I think, influenced by her, influenced by others. And yeah, like, one thing that I don't really know how this came about, I think maybe I was in a workshop taught by Hua Win, a US poet living in Canada now, who, that was her whole workshop style, is we would read a long book by a poet, usually a deceased one. And then she'd give us prompts and we would write in response. And I know we read some Anne Carson, and Anne Carson had this thing of, like, doing these prose poems, but then at the same time, we were reading her translations of the Greek poet Sappho, which are these, like, teeny fragments. So that's some of what I was reading when I was writing some of this. So that's why, like, you'll see in this book some big chunky prose poems, and then interspersed with, like, a few very slight ones with little fragments. So that's something. And then there are more poems like what you'd expect poetry, like free verse poetry, to be, just kind of, in verse, in stanzas. But yeah, I don't know. I'm always trying to learn, and trying to write something new, I guess.
I love that. Thank you. Dorina Opferman is here, and
Hi, Karina.
she has a couple of things. She says I love the descriptions, really powerful and palpable moments. She asks, how did you come to write your pandemic poem? Do you intend on writing more of them?
So the story around the pandemic poem is actually a little bit of a painful story for me, honestly. But at the time, it comes from, the poem itself comes from a specific walk in the woods with a person who was at the time and still is very important to me and in my life. And I mean, the pandemic was so isolating for us all, I think. And so many people were just struggling in so many ways, hunkered down in these little pods of people. It was very binary, like either someone's in your pod or they're not, right? And like me, I'm not married and don't have children, so I spent the first part of the pandemic with my parents in Buffalo, New York, who are in their 80s. And that was quite an experience, being locked in with them for 3.5 months. And then I came back to Dubuque, Iowa, where I was living and teaching at the time. And I mean, there I was honestly very isolated. And I had gone for months since the beginning, basically without hugging anyone. And I'm a very tactile person. I like to hug, I like to embrace, I like to dance with people, so this was like very, very painful. And it was just this incredible moment when, during this walk in the woods, the person mentioned in the poem, we decided to lie down in the grass and put our feet together. And we were just like, joking, like, oh, feel the oxytocin. This is so great, So we did that after, this was like August. So March to August, I've not hugged anyone. I've not held anyone's hand. I've just been like totally feeling this isolation that felt like in a very like intense, visceral way. And so this was such an antidote to that. And that in combination with thinking about like, what is this that's happening to the world? And, for people of any faith tradition who believe in a God who is good and who cares about us, like, what do we do with this? It's the age-old problem of evil. And I think an answer to that can be found in all of the Eastern and Western traditions. There's a mystical vein. And I think that those mystics who grapple with these intense mysteries and accept that there are no easy answers have a lot to tell us. And so I'm no expert in Julian. I mean, she's someone I want to learn more about, Julian of Norwich, but like just thinking of her and how she lived through the plague. So that's how this came from. Am I writing more pandemic poems? I don't know. I mean, I write a lot in my journal, and then at some point I've got to go back and edit. I don't really know. I mean, we're at a different stage of it now where everyone wants to think it's over, but it's really not. So I don't know. I'll just sort of see and respond to what happens. Sometimes it does take me a while. Like, I know I wrote a poem that's not been published anywhere yet, but about visiting a museum right before the pandemic and like not knowing what was happening. That's, like that would be the last museum I'd see for a while. And I could, like, maybe later in a little while, I actually have a poem in this book about the first time visiting a museum after the pandemic. And like how weird that was. So yeah.
Thank you. Dorina says, congrats again. She's excited to get her copy and get it signed when she sees you in May.
Thank you.
Here, this is actually another Paraclete poet that we just published earlier this year. Her name's Amy Nemechek. She says, congratulations on this excellent work, Jeannine. Do you include any of your translation poems in the collection?
Thank you for that question. I do not. And the reason why is typically the authors, I give the authors their own space. And, so it's like, any book that I've published in translation, I consider it to be a book first by the author, and then, by me and by any co-translator involved or co-translators. And editing has a big process very often in translation. But no, in this collection, I've not included any translations. But that would be, an interesting idea. Although, as I said before, I believe that these poems are already translations. They're already translating other ideas, other writers, sometimes named and sometimes not named. I have a poem in here I could read later about Simone Weil, the great, another mystic, a Jewish mystic, and an activist who interestingly considered converting to Catholicism, but did not, and has a totally unique place in the world because of that. But I have a poem about her, so it's, not exactly, but like maybe a translation of some of her ideas. I have a poem that draws on some quotations from the writer Anais Nin, but like straight up like Spanish translations not in this collection.
Thank you so much. Here's a question from Simone McKitterick, who's here. Simone says, having known you for 20 years, I found the first two poems particularly poignant due to knowing about your relationship with your heritage and your mom. However, I've never heard you speak about Poland or being Polish like this before. What prompted you to do this now after all this time?
Thank you so much for this question, Simone. I really appreciate it. I really have quite a specific story behind that. So growing up in the United States, attending a typical Catholic school in a very white European American predominantly environment in Buffalo, we learned about Native American history, and we did learn about this, and we learned about the genocide that occurred. But I think it never really felt personal to me. And it's funny, when I was 20 years old and I actually studied abroad in England, and people would ask me about this. They would ask me, like, what do you think about this aspect of your history as somebody from the United States? And I was very quick to just brush it off, like, oh, like, I don't like, and just say what I just said, that I don't feel personally connected to this. My family was back in Poland when all of this was going on. I mean, like, we weren't the ones who did this, right? Like, this kind of deflection of responsibility. And it was really only more recently when I've been thinking about this. Living in Canada had a big influence on me. I did my PhD in Toronto. And in Canada, 10% of the population is First Nations or Indigenous people. And there's just more consciousness there. The whole thing about, the truth about boarding schools, for example, young people in the 19th and 20th centuries, until quite recently, being taken from their homes, forbidden to speak their language, etc. Like, that happened in Canada, and like, Canadians are reckoning with it. It happened in the US too. And like, it's just not in it's not in the popular consciousness. And so learning about some of this more recently, I've been involved with some people when I lived in Iowa with the Catholic Worker Movement, who are doing Indigenous solidarity work. So people of, white settler colonial backgrounds trying to do solidarity work, especially around environmental issues and pipelines. The Standing Rock issue was really prevalent when I had recently moved to Dubuque, and I got involved with people involved with that. So recently I've been part of an Indigenous book club, and some of the things that we read, like, I highly recommend an Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Another book that I very much recommend is called Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, A History of Indigenous America from 1890 to the Present by David Treuer, Treuer. And like, the main message there is, like, in the popular consciousness, Indigenous history ended in 1890 with the Battle of Wounded Knee. But of course, it didn't. I mean, Indigenous people are still very much here and have been all this time, and are really asking something of those of us who are settler colonizers. So that's really just been in my mind. And looking at my own family history and realizing when my ancestors actually migrated to the US, they migrated at the time when all of this was going on. I mean, this church that my great uncle founded, it's actually great uncle. Maybe I need to fix that in the book on the second printing. But like, yeah, but that sounds kind of clunky. I just kind of want to say my uncle, but like, this church that he founded, which is still there and which I love. I was just there for Easter. was founded in, 1873. It's about to celebrate its 150-year anniversary. So all of these people from Europe were migrating at the same time that this genocide was going on.
Thank you so much. Jeannine, I don't know if you would be willing to talk a little bit more about how you have organized this collection and how something like that comes about. I know I neglected to mention that Jeannine was one of the winners of the Paraclete Poetry Prize, which was fantastic. And I love poetry. I've never really been a poet myself. And so I think you have all these experiences and all of this input all around you that you've talked about that forms what you're writing about. And then how do you put it together in a collection like this?
And it was actually a pretty complicated story because, like I think that this collection brings together a few experiences. It brings together, I would say, some errors and bad choices in the arena of romantic love in my 30s. That's, a big part of this. But another part of it is also growth occurring at that time, I'd say. And another part of it is just the surrounding political issues of the time. I mean, I'd say I wrote these poems pretty much looking at them. 2017, 2018 was when most of them were written. And so, like just the tense political environment that we were in. I mean, that's also, so like, fall creation, creation, fall, redemption, so that kind of became like a triptych, just as like a way of conceptualizing this and bringing some of these different narratives in the book together. And I think order is always difficult. And as a reader of poetry, I used to just like pull out a poetry book and skim and just kind of read in whatever order I felt like. But now I've come to understand that poets generally do want things to be read in a specific order. And so the order does matter. And another like interesting layer of this is Paraclete had some, as I'm sure you know, Rachel, obviously intimately, Paraclete had some changes in leadership during the time when this book was coming to fruition. So the judges chose it for the contest as a winner, which I was thrilled about. But then the editors came in and said, we like this book. We're glad it won the contest, but it actually needs to be a little longer. Can you add more to it? So that complicated things. And so, it's like, I'd urge people to not assume that this book, even though it is very personal, like it doesn't reflect my biography or like, my personal story or anybody's. It's more thematically organized because there's a whole bunch of newer material that I essentially added in 2021, like the pandemic poem that I read, a small thing, but I tried to stick with the themes, so please don't read into this that this is like some straight up story of my life. Please don't do that to me, Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
Dorina asks, how did you arrive at the title and how was that process for you?
Thank you for that question, Dorina. I was pretty adamant about this title. So we see all the time, like in any kind of just colloquial language, like, I'm going to come to your party and bring a cake and / or cookies, right? Although that would be a nice party guest if they bring both, right? But I'm just thinking of an example off the top of my head. But like, I think two ideas converged for me to form this title. So the Christian existentialist philosopher Soren Kierkegaard has his famous book, Either / or. And I mean, like, that's his whole thing, right? That we need to make difficult choices in life and we can't do everything. And the choice is always tragic. And these choices make us who we are, right? Like, that's kind of his premise. And then the other idea informing this is Richard Rohr has a book called Yes and, which was recommended to me to read. And so I just decided to take that familiar phrase, and/or, and reverse it with the idea that sometimes, yes, we have to say or, but like ultimately, if we can arrive at and, if and when, that's always find a creative way to do so. That's the better option. And so, yeah, it's a kind of awkward title. I recognize that it doesn't smoothly roll off the tongue, but this title was pretty important to me. So I'm very grateful that the book's being published with this title.
Thank you so much. If anyone has any more questions for Jeannine, please feel free to use our Q&A button or our chat bar, and I'll keep my eye on that. You mentioned that you might want to read one more poem, Jeannine. Would this be a good time for that, or is there anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I'll read one. I'll read one more. Sure. We only have time for one more. I have to think what would be a good one to finish with. All right, I'll actually, I'll read with the last one in the book.
Okay.
And I feel bad about this poem though, because I'm kind of lying in it, because I talk in this poem about how I'm going to learn how to make this particular dish from Greece. And I should also mention a little shout out to the writing workshop in Greece. So in 2018, I got to go on this amazing workshop led by Christopher Bakken and Allison Wilkins Bakken, and I took a class with the well-known, much-loved poet Amy Nezhukumatatil. And so like Greece and Greek imagery run through this poem or run through this book. So I haven't read any of the Greek poems, so maybe we'll end with this one. It's in praise of a Greek dish called revithia, but full disclosure, I'm lying. I haven't learned how to make it yet, but I will one of these days. This is essentially a recipe poem, so try it out yourself at home. Maybe use our friend the internet to help find a recipe, but the poem's a start. In praise of revithia, written in Tassos, Greece. Revithia, your Greek name so melodious it could belong to a goddess, so much more luminous than your supermarket English equivalent, chickpea soup. I wait for you as hunters anticipate a deer, as divers delve beneath the waves in search of their 8-footed prize. All morning, the wood stove's fragrance harkens your arrival, tiny round amber jewels adorned with silver onions, set with carrot and rosemary, emerging from hours of refinement. I always had the idea that vegetarians don't actually like food, a friend once declared. Clearly, he has not met you, glorious revithia, with your perfume of exploded sugar, melting oil, pine. You are made by a woman who sold diamonds, by a man who fought battles until both traded fatigues and transatlantic flights for a home under a canopy of olives and grapes, for figs and a wood stove. You are the tiny circles formed when people come to understand that every yes requires a no, that poignant refusals trace the shape of a gem shining with a brightness concealed while it lay buried in rock. When I get home, I will try to remake you. Done are my days of cans and quick fixes of just add water. Your sweetness requires much waiting. I will soak the dry spheres all night, chop the onions, add the sugar, the carrots and rosemary. Only at the end comes salt. And while you won't be the same, still you'll remind me of marble quarries and blue Aegean waves, of temples and mountains, of the simple truth that every no contains a jewel, a sweet and savory yes.
I love that. Thank you so much. Wonderful. It's not too late. You can still learn how to make the soup, I think.
Well, I mean, I could make it and I can totally, I mean, I totally soak beans, you know, overnight.
Yeah.
Like that's not a problem. It's just the slow cooking process. That's what I'd have
Yes.
to learn. Because like they really do, they cook this like for hours and hours. And that's something that I am not used to doing.
Amazing.
So
Amazing. Dorina says, I adore this title. I think sometimes being uncomfortable uses us as readers to dig deeper. How does this published work inform your work now? And if not, she says, why?
how does this published work inform my work now? Thank you for that question. So Dorina knows that, so another project that I'm working on right now is actually not involving poetry at all. It's more of a nonfiction / journalism book that is looking at our political divide, specifically in the context of the Catholic Church, because since the Catholic Church does not allow schism, in many ways, I see it as a microcosm for US society as a whole, in that it's a place where this big divide that has existed, arguably, you can argue about when it started. I would pinpoint 2010 as maybe a big moment when we started getting this rift in US society. So like, you know, the Catholic Church, interestingly, replicates the divide, but it's also a place where people from these different sides might encounter each other, whereas otherwise they wouldn't. So the whole thing of or and, like, how do we stick to what we believe, whatever that may be, and have tolerance, you know, maintain relationships, maintain connection with people who believe and value very different things. I think that's a question that a lot of people in the US are asking right now. So
Yeah.
that's one way that I think these questions in this book are informing the work I'm doing now. And in terms of poetry, I mean, I continue to write a lot. I'm currently in a workshop here in Pittsburgh with a wonderful poet called Joy Katz, Katz. I highly recommend looking into her work. And it's all about joy. And that's how I know Dorina Opferman, who's on this call. They have a mentorship program through this workshop, and she is actually my mentor. But yeah, Joy Katz is leading this workshop about the idea of joy. And like we're talking a lot about like, where do we find joy? And like, what are the conditions for it? What brings it about? And one thing that has come up a lot is like the relationship between joy and grief, or joy and sorrow, and how these sentiments that seem so contradictory often come and exist together. So I think a lot of the poetry that I'm writing now is still very much in this vein of living with these many contradictions. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you. Everyone loved this last poem, Jeannine. Dorina, she says, one day you and me, a Greece poetry writers retreat. I see it. Now I'm hungry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm saying Amy's saying, what a glorious last line for your book. Well done. And Simone is saying, in terms of slow cooking, crock pot or pressure cooker. I know Simone is a pretty serious chef, so I can definitely learn from her. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jeannine, for sharing so much of your heart and your experience with all of us. Thank you to all of you who joined us today. And we had some people with us on Facebook too, which is lovely. We'll post this video on, oh, thank you, Marjorie. Yeah, thank you so much for being with us. We'll post this video on YouTube too, so everyone can feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues later on, for anyone who couldn't make it or anyone who you know would love Jeannine's work. Of course, Or And is available from your local bookseller, hopefully, which is where we always encourage you to go first. But to celebrate the collection today, if you would like to order it from the Paraclete Press website, you can use the coupon code Or And, just like the title, and you'll get 20% off your purchase. So we'd love to have you hop on over to our site. You can read more about Jeannine and her work. You can explore the rest of our poetry library while you're at it, and hopefully find some things that you'd like to add to your own bookshelves. Likewise, on the Paraclete poetry pages, you can find bulk discounts. So if you want to share this book with your book club or with a class, or maybe with a group at church, friends and family, please visit us. We'll always do our best to get you the very best rate possible. And just again, congratulations to you, Jeannine, for winning our Paraclete Poetry Prize. I'm glad that a few years later, we finally have this beautiful, beautiful book as part of our library. So thank you so much for reading to us today, for talking with us. We hope all of you enjoyed this time together. Our prayers are with everyone for health and safety, and we hope you'll join us for more of these readings together. Thank you so much, Jeannine.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
Take care. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
You too. Yeah, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.